Hello, welcome back. It is week 156 on Out on the Line podcast. I'm Jeff with my co-host Alex. As always, Alex, how are we doing this week?
Jeff, I'm afraid if we don't get a move on this one, I'm liable to bust. I might just giz all over myself.
Well, we wouldn't want that, and I'm sure you could find some paper towels, but we are going to be talking about King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard once again on the podcast. It seemed like such a short time ago, but it's because they release a lot of albums inconsistently. This time it's called Flight B741, but we'll be getting to that a little later because Alex, do you hear about something might be happening across the pond, yeah?
Oh, in it! Go on, right, chuffed! Football!
The brothers Gallagher, I think the sons of the comedian Gallagher, I think canonically that's correct. Noel and Liam have decided to bury the hatchet. I can imagine there's a number of reasons, not the least of which is probably money and lots of money. Decided to get the band back together. Oasis is going to be making another run at it with a tour announced starting in 2025, I believe.
Yes. Yep. That's the poop as far as I know. Yeah, didn't have that on my bingo card for 2024 or 2025. That was one of those things I just assumed, like, at a certain point, even if they did totally reconcile, because they're such assholes, they'd be like, no, we're never getting back together. We're never getting back together, innit? You're my best friend, no. You're my best friend, Liam. You're much more than a brother to me, innit? Oh, fish and chips. But fuck everybody else. We hate our fans and most other people, innit? So they do that as spite.
They're going to survive forever on spite. Like, if you think Keith Richards is surprisingly old for the things he's done, just give it another 50 years when the Gallagher brothers are still looking like they do now and still arguing with each other. By that point, Oasis will have broken up and gotten back together. You know, if the recent timeline is any indication, about 4 times by that point. But it's actually, we jest, but it's, I think, pretty fantastic news that they're getting back together, going to play some more shows because they've both been consistently like putting out music since Oasis stopped. What is it? Noel Gallagher and the High Flying Birds, I think, is one of them. And then does Liam Gallagher's band have a name, or is it just like the Liam Gallagher Extravaganza?
Yeah, it's the fucking Liam Gallagher Circle Jerk Hour. I don't know. I don't care. The Noel Gallagher High Flying Birds that I've experienced, great, really like it. Everybody's on the Run. You know, probably faint and damning praise to not remember the name of a single other song. Tanner screaming, wallet in his mouth so he doesn't swallow.
He's so mad he's not on this podcast right now.
Because he's going to try to go. He's 100% going to try to go. And when I say try, he'll succeed. He'll go. But our good pal Rory, always the guy to bring reality crashing down along everyone's head, he maintains, he's like, you watch, man, you watch. And here's the thing. I agree with him to a point. You watch, man, you watch. You're going to spend all that money. You're going to get all the way there. You're going to be in the arena. And then 5 minutes before the show, they're going to break up again. They're going to have a huge fight. The show's going to be canceled. Now, that's plausible because that's how the band ended. So I get where he's coming from. But that was his rationale for not wanting to be a part of this trip to London to see the Oasis reunion. But don't worry, if Bitcoin takes off, he'll go. Too much of a risk to go making plans for Oasis now. But hey, if Bitcoin hits.
Yeah, that's the internet money. It's all real.
It's all real.
I would love to go see Oasis. I mean, that would be fantastic. I think I kind of agree with Rory though. And
it's hard not to.
I think they're going to get a few shows in before it happens. You know, I think it's going to be one of them starts getting headlines of like, oh, we can't believe how much Noel Gallagher still has it. And Liam's going to be like, what the fuck? You know, so I think it's going to be something like that. I think where one of them feels like they're not getting the credit or the attention they deserve. I think before it was because they just couldn't stand each other. And they hadn't, you know, they weren't as rich as they probably are now. Although maybe that's why they're doing it, is maybe that those checks are drying up a little bit. And they're going to make so much goddamn money on this tour. Like, they're already predicting that for the European part of the tour, you know, at least through the UK and or, you know, Germany, England, the kind of northwestern part where they're going to be the most popular part, they're already going to outsell like the Taylor Swift Eras tour in those areas. So like the UK and the neighboring countries kind of close by to there, they're already predicting like millions and millions of ticket sales. And I can absolutely believe it. And I also know what's going to happen to these ticket prices. If you don't get in on that boat, like right when it pulls into the port, you're going to have a hard time getting tickets to this thing without paying a literal arm and a leg.
You sure are. Slip inside the eye of your mind and make sure that you are in that queue. It's gonna be a bloodbath because you've seen the memes where it's like a bunch of shirtless bros singing a creed, right? And it says Eras Tour for Men.
Mm-hmm.
This is gonna be the Eras Tour for a very specific kind of man. And they will have found community with one another at long last when they go to these shows.
And I mean, Oasis for a while in the 90s was like the biggest thing as far as rock music goes, pretty much in the world, certainly in Europe. And, we had bands here, like obviously Nirvana and Pearl Jam and bands like that. But I think by the time Oasis was really like popping off, those bands were kind of on the tail end of their run. You know, a lot of the members were dying off at that point.
Well,
Like there was reasons, certainly multitude of reasons why those bands stopped performing or stopped being quite as popular. I think you can call it a fad. I think that's very like, it boils it down too far as like what that kind of genre of music was. But Oasis, I think, brought a much more accessible version of rock music that your middle-aged white people in the suburbs could get down with just as much as anything else on the radio. Whereas a band like Alice in Chains or Nirvana or even Pearl Jam, was just like you could get into some of it, but there was probably a line that didn't get crossed. Oasis didn't have a single line like that. It was very accessible, appealing music, and it had an edge to it, probably just because the Gallagher brothers had an edge to them, because I don't think the music really had that much of an edge to it. There wasn't much controversial in there, but great like anthemic choruses, so Sally can wait. I mean,
yeah.
just like really, really catchy, hooky kind of rock music. And it was perfect for that era because, the world kind of has always wanted rock bands. And, you've had runs of the Arctic Monkeys had a great run. Jack White, the White Stripes, they've had a great run. Queens of the Stone Age, great run. But I don't want to mention the Foo Fighters, but I think I kind of have to in this
Yeah.
instance. But like, as far as bands reaching the damn stratosphere of popularity, like it really hasn't happened like Oasis since Oasis. These other bands have had fantastic careers, but at no point do I think you're getting the worldwide recognition, the kind of people waiting on like every move they make, like you had with Oasis. They just hit such a special nerve, like in the music zeitgeist. They had a familiar sound because of their obvious influence from like the British invasion bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Who and many, many others. Like you heard those like influences from them, but it had just a more modern feel to it. It was like you had a band like Fastball back in the day that played like a very retro version of rock, and it was good. It was fun music, but for some reason Oasis seemed new while at the same time feeling very familiar. And I think that was such a perfect like combination they were able to find. I don't know if you like bottle that again, how you ever do that.
Well, and we're going to get into what it means to have a gimmick and stick to it and whether that's a good or a bad thing. I'm being so mysterious
So
about this.
cagey.
So cagey. So cagey about the Giz. Sometimes that happens to us. We get a little mysterious, but I'll tell you what's not a mystery, Jeff. It's youtube.com/C/out on that line. Folks, it is the place, the source of all of our power, all of our videos. Here's the thing that I've learned. You need to subscribe, you need to turn your notifications on, and you need to hit the like button. You get smash the like button. But the big thing you need to do is comment for the algorithm. I cannot tell you how many videos I see where someone puts like in commenting for the algorithm. Apparently it works. So you guys gotta help us out here. Throw us a freaking bone, Scott. and start leaving comments and all that other good stuff at youtube.com/C/out on that line.
I love it when you go off the rails with those.
Oh yeah, that wasn't even
Yeah, so
it was
you
one of my
just
more
you're
theatrical
just
pieces.
cutting a promo. Love it.
Well, let me tell you
Absolutely love
something, brother.
it. Well, why don't we both tell the listeners a little something about a little band called King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard in the new album Flight B741. Now, you may remember us doing the album, and I'm not going to try to remember the name of this album. I should have pulled it up in with a little bit of forethought, but in hindsight, we didn't do it. So the Petrodragonic Apocalypse, something like Dawn of the Oil Age, whatever it was called.
I have it if you want me to do it.
Yes.
Petrodragonic Apocalypse, or Dawn of Eternal Night, an annihilation of planet Earth and the beginning of merciless damnation.
Yeah, fantastic. Loved that album. It was heavy, it was raw, it was fast. It was like everything I love about metal music in a nice little bow. I was expecting, you know what? I don't know what I was expecting with King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I think that's like part of the deal. Part of that gimmick you were talking about is that you don't know what you're going to get with these guys. It's going to be formed around rock and roll music in some fashion. That's about all you're getting as far as, a heads up about what you're going to be running into. So this was not metal. This was very much like, felt like I was listening to like an old Foghat record, or like some early Leonard Skinner, some definitely had a classic rock, like Southern rock kind of 70s feel to it.
For me, it had a 70s psychedelic flavor to it. Very reminiscent of one of my favorite King Giz albums, which is Paper Mache Dream Balloon.
Mm-hmm.
There's a person I work with, and they were telling me because I hadn't listened yet, and they were like, when you listen to that album, if you love Paper Mache Dream Balloon, you're going to love this one. Took that to be very encouraging. This was very 70s psychedelic, but it was also kind of going back to their bluesy roots. Now, I will say off the top, I don't claim to be like the King Gizzard guy, because quite frankly, it's too expansive. I haven't heard every single album. I'm working on it, but there's 26 of these things, and 9 of them come out a year. You're just barely getting your hand around one, and then you're like, oh my God. Oh, this one's an EP. Well, I'll stash that for, oh, fuck, another one just came out. You're just like catching bullets left and right, which is great. And it's consistently good. But for me, this typifies like what I love about King Giz, which is sumptuous melodies, and everybody gets a crack at singing, and it's clearly born out of a jam, but it has way more discipline. And to top it all off, it has a gimmick. Their albums always have some kind of gimmick. The best example being Nonagon Infinity. That is specifically designed to, it's like incredibly mathematical. Like they're a prog heavy band, especially the last couple years. It's pretty wild what they do on Nonagon Infinity, because it starts and ends in the same place. So it literally is infinite. If you were to put it on repeat, it's just gonna keep looping in on itself. It's pretty wild. And that is, make no mistake, a gimmick. Like that's an attention grabbing choice. However, gimmick has a negative connotation that I don't think applies to that album or to this one, because it's not. There's a song where they literally say the lyrics, "I'm a silly Billy," but it's not silly Billy music. It's fun as fuck, but they're not like, I think people have this misnomer that they're just these like goofy bards. And it's like, no, they're just like unstoppable geniuses who can't quit putting stuff out, and they're not afraid to try anything. So, I obviously, off the top, not to bury the lead, love this one.
Yeah, and I think you're going to hear me singing the praises just as heavily on this one, because I definitely have not, like, the fact that you just named more than the 2 King Gizzard albums that I've mentioned so far on this podcast means you know far more about King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard than I do. And going back to you mentioned like that you don't want to be or try to act like you're the King Giz guy. I don't know if I ever want to meet the King Giz guy.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if it's anybody outside the band, I'm not sure I want to meet that guy. But moving on to like why this album was great is like I love that like 70s era of kind of very distorted rock and roll, that bluesy based psychedelic kind of rock and roll. But I still, like I said, I heard a lot of like Leonard Skinner in here, especially like early Leonard Skinner and some Molly Hatchet. So I heard a lot of great things. What I loved most of all, though, is you have to kind of take this album in with whatever the totality is that you know of King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. To appreciate like how good this album is, you have to know they've released something recently like Petrodragonic Apocalypse, and something that is like performing metal music at that high of a level, and then performing this style music, this kind of very rootsy rock and roll, like at this high level. Like the fact that they can do multiple things, even just those two things, and do them so well. How many other bands on the planet can you think of that have done that? Like think of Arctic Monkeys, their like pre Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino output and everything, including and after that. And you're getting two drastically different experiences and not in a good way. They don't do the other one quite as strong. Now you may have your personal feelings about Tranquility Base and the car one, whatever that was called. But
The car.
but generally, yeah, the car, they were perfect. The fact is, like, generally the fan base is not viewing those two albums as anywhere as good as everything like AM and before. And King Gizzard, I don't think that's the case. I'm not sure there's like any of their albums that the fan base is like, we don't listen to that one. Like, if you like that album, you're not a real King Giz fan. I don't think it works like that, because all of them seem to be as good as the other. And the fact that they make so many of them is so impressive. Like, I can't even really wrap my head around being that productive. You hear about productive artists, like for a while, like Eminem was releasing an album like every year. Like 50 Cent released a bunch, DMX released 2 in a year, and you're like, oh my God, that's incredible. And then you realize King Gizzard's released 26 of these. And what have they been around since like 2013 or something?
They've released an album while we've been sitting here.
Yeah, it's just like insane and so impressive. The artistry, that like the work ethic you have to do that. And I think they're constantly touring.
And yeah, they are. And they fucking came to Portland and I couldn't get tickets, dude.
Well, I mean, a place like Portland, I'm going to have the same problem in Austin when they come here. I mean, it's just is what it is.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's also all so consistently good. And when I say what I'm about to say, which is it all sounds the same, I don't mean like melodically or patterns or structure or anything. It's all like you said, from album to album, the leaps can be stark. They can do the same kind of thing and like lean into the heavy for 3 albums in a row. But like the first album that I really listened to, Omnium Gatherum, was this like big, weird, spacey, experimental. It opens with like a 20-minute The Dripping Tap. It's like a 20-minute prog jam. You get a song like Gaia, where like Rory was sitting there trying to figure out what time signature the drumming was in, and every time he was locked in, it would just jump, and he was like, whoa. And like, Rory's the kind of guy that can figure that out if you give him a second. And he couldn't really wrap his head around it. So they make music like that. Like if they were super prolific, but they just kept tossing out like a comparison I'll make, which is going to come back around, Grateful Dead, where just like every Grateful Dead song is I'm a dead, a scattered begonia. Like it's sorry, Tanner. Sorry, but it's true. They all pretty much have a consistent jam band sound. And then for me, the one Grateful Dead album that breaks that I really actively actually like is Working Man's Dead. Working Man's Dead is a good album. And this, I think, is King Gizzard's Working Man's Dead. I heard that all over this, where like Grateful Dead, they would do those subtle harmonies that became unsubtle because someone was always hitting a sour note. Like Candyman, or it's like, look at the kid, it's like, holy shit, Bob Weir is so flat. Bill Lesh doesn't know where he is. that was something that like we all know that like they rarely could nail, but King Giz nails it every time. And it's following that same kind of like blues inspired pattern, but it's got like a huge rock and roll infusion in it too. And the psychedelic elements on top of it. There is a lot going on in every album, song to song. And it's just impressive that over 26 albums, and I haven't heard them all yet, but I also haven't heard a clunker yet. I haven't heard a single clunker yet.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna either. I don't know if he listens to this, but I have a friend of mine that lived here in Austin that was a big King Gizzard fan and was in a like a noise rock band and kind of in a put King Giz up on a pedestal. And if he was very much like Rory, like very, very critical. Like it had to be perfect for him to like it, you know? And he never stopped talking about how good King Gizzard was. So that to me, like I always kind of had respect for them because I know how exacting this person was about their music taste, just that kind of person. And I really what I like Petrodragonic Apocalypse was my first like real long-term experience with King Giz. I'd listened to songs here and there for years before that, but not anything like in bulk. So I really was impressed with that album. And I didn't think I was going to be, through the first couple songs of this, that I was going to be more impressed with this than I was with Petrodragonic Apocalypse. But I don't think I can stop short of saying that this album is perfect, honestly. There's so many songs where it's got that like tongue in cheek kind of humor, like Hog Calling Contest. I mean, just absolutely a fantastic song. While I'm sweating and I'm putting lipstick on, happy in mud, I'm going the whole hog. When pigs fly, I'll be on the flight. B741. I mean, just hysterical lyrics. First of all, that's not the only set of hysterical lyrics on the album. They're kind of all over the place, but just they're such a like satirical band. Like you always know there's some other meaning. Like they're saying or singing about something goofy, but there's something serious that they're actually talking about, and I think it always feels like that with their music, whether it's true or not. It's like Petrodragonic Apocalypse was about oil tycoons taking over the world and it like, climate change burning out the earth. Like, what it's actually about. But a lot of the lyrics were very funny. And I feel like you get that sense from B741. I loved Hog Calling Contest. Also, Field of Vision, the little call and response situation they do in like the chorus, just truly great. Like it had so many send ups of like what made a lot of those 70s rock songs fantastic without making it feel very contrived.
And correct. And every song to song is like it's got so much personality and a different personality because they all take lead vocalist duties, passing those around. And these are all based on jams that they're all individually working on. But having played together that long, obviously you have the kind of sensibility that when you turn in your assignment, it's going to resemble the things around it, and you tweak and you finesse and you come up with a fully fleshed concept, which is what we have going here. It's the songs are more like chapters in one consistent story. And I don't mean story in terms of a concept album. It's like the music is telling the story. This is a blues oriented, psychedelic. There's like elements of glam rock to it. There's some kind of Beatles-esque stuff going on. David Bowie, T-Rex on a blues album. It's very like eclectic, but not confused. And when you talk about it being a perfect album, I agree. And here's the thing: the perfect album doesn't necessarily mean it's this like you can't just give that away to some band that releases an album every other week. And it's like, well, why not? Because a perfect album is perfect for what it is. There's not like one standard. The Great American Novel is one thing, right? Like we know there's certain boxes you need to check with the pathos and the quality of the writing and the themes, and like that is a specific thing. You can write about totally different things, but there's a certain like je ne sais quoi about the Great American Novel. But in terms of a perfect album, there's not one standard. It's perfect for what it is and what it's trying to do. And that's this one. I mean, like B741. I knew I was all in as soon as Mirage City got about 30 seconds in, right off the
Oh
top.
yeah.
Something, something, da 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 da, like just hitting those subtle. I wish I knew my music theory in moments like these, because I know there's got to be a term for like what that turn is, what that step is, but it's just one of those expert things that keeps you guessing and keeps you invested in the song. And that is ultimately one of King Giz's biggest features, greatest tricks, is investment start to finish. You can burn out on Fish jam band stuff. Fish. You can burn out on Grateful Dead. Hell, you can even burn out on the string cheese incident. I've never heard of it, but I'm sure it's possible. Um, you can burn out on jammy stuff. Again, this is born of jams. You can tell, but it's disciplined. Some of these things are just like people jamming out and it's not fully formed, and whatever, that's fine. It's got its place. It's not for me, but it can be fun. But this is jam grows up, jam has a purpose, jam gets fit into an aesthetic, and this is what we get as a result.
Yeah, I like the way you put it, because there is a lot of that jammy element in this, and I think that's something I thought about and had to kind of reckon with the whole time, because I'm generally not a big fan of that. But I think, like you said, there's probably so many of our favorite rock and roll songs. Like they were just jamming together. Someone started playing a riff, and they realized that that was awesome, and they built the song around that. So like there's an element to that being necessary in rock and roll music, and generally probably a lot of any music where live instrumentation is involved. Probably jamming is a huge part of the creation and writing process of that. But where you separate yourselves from bands like Fish and String Cheese Incident and like Humphreys McGee is where it sounds like they just decided to keep jamming and just turned on the tape recorder. We're like, oh, let's make sure we get this down. They realized, King Giz realized they have a good idea, right? They have this jam, they came up with this riff, this time signature, maybe a key change or something that they like doing. And then they said, okay, let's make that perfect. So instead of it just being this kind of spur of the moment feel and like this tossed off kind of thing, you get the sense that these guys like came up with an idea probably through just practicing and jamming and just like trying stuff out, and then went back and said, okay, we've got this in this range. Let's get it down to perfect in this range. And I think it's really, that's where you separate yourselves generally. And whether they ever have as many record sales as like the Arctic Monkeys or Queens of the Stone Age or any bands like that, they certainly deserve to, with the effort that they've put in and the quality of that output. Because you have an album where you have like a hog calling contest, and I was reading off some lyrics for that, and then you have a song like Sad Pilot, which for me might be the best song on the album overall, like depending on kind of what you're looking for out of it. But the first verse, I've been to the doctor somewhat recently, and then you're like, oh, it sounds like they're going to start being funny, right? They say in the background is call and response thing, because I haven't felt safe in my skin. There's an army of torment policing my pain, and it's got me disintegrating. I mean, you go from hog calling contest to that in the same album, and they both make sense. Like that's part of what makes a perfect album for me, is if there's nothing that I think takes away from the rest of it, if every part of it only adds to the overall sum of everything, that's a perfect album. I think there's different standards for like what those parts can mean or like what that is. So I think you would put it very well that it's an abstract concept rather than something really quantifiable. But I think when you look at it at its base level, like, is there anything on this album that doesn't add its own like special sauce to the dish?
And yeah, I agree. There's sometimes there are a lot of disparate elements thrown in together all at once, but it doesn't clash. And that for me is a huge trick. And it contributes to this idea of it being perfect. Like you think about the Olympics and like the balance beam and stuff like that. You like it's stick the landing. That's not like the only thing you get judged on, but it's very important. If you don't stick the landing, doesn't really matter what came before. So this is one of those albums that pretty quickly you figure out what it set out to do, and it sticks the landing and it accomplishes it by the end. And it gives us like so many different weird things to chew on. Like you can read those lyrics and then you have a hog calling contest, but then you have like a theme that really appears in a lot of their music where they're talking about like tachyon particles, and in the song Antarctica it's talking about like artificial flakes on your face. uh, they love to talk about like synthetic stuff and like the artificial and the technological, but then they get into like very spiritual stuff, and then they get into very grounded, what you like, all that is real is what can be observed. You get like these very different perspectives, and I think when you can have all of that, it rounds the whole album out, which again is perfect. Again, I've never run into a King Giz clunker yet. Individual songs off whole albums I haven't listened to. Oh, there's just a punishing volume of content out there. And I hate to make it sound like an obligation or a chore, but as a Frank Zappa guy, haven't done that one in a while. It's just like, it's such a punishing volume, and you want to be that guy, right? Like you said, you never want to meet a King Giz guy. I wish, man. I wish I could just grow a big wizard beard and quit my job and do acid and wear Jellies flip-flops all day and listen to King Gizzard. Do I wish that was my life? Do I wish that was my reality? Of course I do. But the fact of the matter is, I got to live in this boring shell of an existence because I don't know King Giz top to bottom. So you don't want to meet that guy? I wish I were that guy. In all seriousness, like, if you know, right? Like I have a King Giz sticker on my work laptop. I'm an original, don't worry. I have a King Giz sticker on my laptop, and when people see it, they'll either like, "Oh, fucking nice sticker, dude. Let me tell you, Infest the Rat's Nest is probably my favorite album. Although Nonagon Infinity is hard to beat." Now, of course, like they'll just start going at you, and you're like, "Oh my god, what have I done?" Or they've never heard of them, and you try to describe it, and they're like, "Oh, so you just do drugs on the weekend."
Well,
like,
to
wow.
them, to the people that have never heard of them, you are the King Giz guy.
It's true. I can pretty much make shit up and they'll think it's real. If you slip in, paper mache dream balloon, anything you say after that is fair game.
Yeah, they're never going to know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Gently grooming a crow, and they're like, oh.
Petting the bean.
Petting the bean. Yeah, there's a lot of activity going on over
there. They're getting wild and rambunctious here. So I think we ought to wrap this up. But I don't know if you could tell, I'm going to say buy it on this record. This was fantastic.
Yeah, I'll be getting my hands on this one ASAP. Really great. And we're on another one of those streaks for me. I know you weren't hot on Claro, but I'm like, I feel a good turn coming on.
Yeah,
we've kind of had some struggles, but like a bridge over troubled water, King Giz is here.
Well, there is next week, if you are interested in this one, Sabrina Carpenter released her album.
Yes, I'm very interested.
Okay, well, let's lock that baby in. You got 2 buy-its for King Giz. I think that's 4 buy-its in a row for King Giz between this one and Petrodragonic Apocalypse. I just wanted to prove I could say that correctly one more time.
Petrodragonic Apocalypse. Hey, remember that Big Thief album we did? Dragon New Warm Mountain, I Believe in You.
It was a terrible album, and you just one-up me. So this was just a really sour, bitter way.
Wait, you thought
this podcast,
the Big Thief album was bad?
Yeah, if you go back and listen to that episode, you will probably not hear me say very many nice things about it.
Oh my god, I blocked that out, I guess. Trauma for another day.
Yeah. Well, folks, come back next week and you will see our thoughts. We will expound on the virtues of Sabrina Carpenter. Until next time.